Hey there, chosen ones. Some entrances in life, they don't just ripple, they detonate. Yours, it rattled the very foundations of expectations. From the moment you let out that first wail, there was something in the air, something different, almost disruptive about you. And trust me, I'm not laying it on thick. Look at the patterns. History whispers the same story. Every time a soul comes into this world vibrating on a different frequency, the pushback starts early. Ever wonder why some kids get targeted before they can even tie their shoes? Why your childhood felt like boot camp before you even knew what the drill was? Here's the raw truth. Predators don't chase the average. They're after the rare, the valuable. A lion doesn't waste its energy on carrion. It goes for the vibrant living thing brimming with untamed energy. That opposition, that constant friction you've felt since day one, it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a flashing neon sign pointing to your worth. You weren't under attack because you were breakable. You were targeted because you were carrying something significant. And honestly, looking back, doesn't it strike you as bizarre the lengths people, institutions, even your own family went to just to keep you in line? It's almost laughable now, isn't it? You were just trying to breathe, trying to be, but the way they reacted, you'd think you were a walking, talking revolution. Spoiler alert, you are. That's the secret they desperately hoped you'd never uncover. You weren't born to just fill space. You were born to leave a dent. You weren't designed to fade into the background. You were created to shake things up, and deep down they always felt it. That's why the hunt began before you even knew the rules of the game. Stick with me, because by the time we're done here, you'll not only understand why you've been hunted, but also why every attempt to bring you down fizzled, and why your very existence continues to send tremors through the structures that thought they had you all figured out. First, you came into this world with a spirit that flat out refuses to be owned. That fact alone has made your journey feel like an endless tug of war. From the jump, there was a part of you that wouldn't bend, wouldn't break, even when you didn't have the words to articulate why. Most folks are pretty pliable. They're told who to be, what to believe, where to fit, and they accept the blueprint with minimal resistance. You, on the other hand, were never wired that way. The instant someone tried to box you in, you Houdini'd your way out. When they tried to cram you into their cookie-cutter mold, something deep within you screamed, "No!" That resistance wasn't arrogance. It wasn't rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It was your soul knowing it could only answer to the one who sent it here. This is precisely why authority figures, entire systems, even well-meaning family members found you challenging. They couldn't possess you. And let's be real, the world has a serious addiction to ownership. Parents often feel they have a right to dictate their children's future. Society wants to control your choices. Institutions crave ownership of your beliefs. Friends and partners sometimes try to claim your very identity. But in your case, ownership was a pipe dream, and that drove people up the wall. They slapped labels on you, stubborn, ungrateful, defiant, when the truth was you were simply free. There's a definite risk in being unownable, because people who can't control you often try to destroy you. It's just human nature. What they can't possess, they want to silence. You probably noticed how early on they tried to break your spirit discipline that crossed the line, pressure to conform, punishments that felt wildly out of proportion. That wasn't just correction, it was an attempt to clip wings they couldn't claim as their own. But here's the twist. Their failure to own you became the very evidence that you were never meant to be theirs in the first place. The frustration others felt around you was really the friction of your purpose rubbing against their desperate attempts at control. Deep down, they recognized something you didn't quite grasp yet. You answered to a higher calling. That's why even when they thought they had you cornered, you always found a way to slip through their fingers. It wasn't just luck. It was by design. You've lived your whole life proving that some spirits are simply too vast to be contained. And no matter the pressure, the unownable part of you only grew stronger. That's not just defiance, that's destiny unfolding. Second, your energy throws a wrench in their programming. Your energy jams their frequency, and that has been a major source of conflict in your life. Most people operate on autopilot, running pre-programmed scripts handed down by family, culture, society. They learn to plaster on a smile when they're crumbling inside, to say the expected words while hiding the messy truth, to maintain a flawless facade even if it's killing them. These scripts work well for the majority because no one dares to question them. But the instant you walk into a room, the script falters. Suddenly, what was carefully concealed starts to feel exposed, and people can't quite put their finger on why. They just sense that something about you makes their mask feel unbearably heavy. It's not that you call them out or confront them directly. Most of the time, you don't even say a word. It's your energy itself, your presence, your aura, your vibration that pulls the truth kicking and screaming to the surface. You might have noticed people getting defensive around you for seemingly no reason, or over-explaining themselves when you haven't even asked a question. That's not random. It's because in your presence their programming malfunctions, it glitches out. And nothing rattles people more than feeling like their carefully rehearsed performance is suddenly falling apart. This is why you've often been misunderstood. People projected onto you assuming you were judging them when all you did was exist. They confused the discomfort of their own exposed truth with some kind of attack emanating from you. But in reality, your spirit carries a frequency that makes it impossible for lies to settle comfortably. The light within you interferes with the systems they use to survive. And because so many people build their entire lives on those systems, on pretending, hiding, manipulating you, became a threat to them without even trying. This has complicated relationships. You're not one for endless small talk. You naturally steer conversations toward deeper waters. You expose inconsistencies without even realizing it, and you force people to confront the parts of themselves they'd rather keep buried. That's not easy for them because most people prefer comforting illusions over harsh reality. Still, you can't help but radiate truth. It's not something you do. It's something you are. And that's why they've always reacted so intensely to you. You don't just deviate from the script, you shred it. Third, you were never intended to be neutral. You were never designed for neutrality. And that simple truth explains why your life has always felt different. Some people are born to maintain the peace, to keep the ship steady, to preserve the status quo. But you were created to rock the boat, to disrupt the pattern, to initiate change. That's why even when you tried to stay quiet, to play small, to keep your head down, things around you still shifted. Your mere presence has weight, and it forces things to evolve whether you intend it to or not. Neutrality simply isn't in your DNA. You were made to challenge comfort zones, to break up rigid structures, and to propel situations in directions they would never have gone without you. This is why people have often accused you of being too much, too intense. They weren't necessarily lying about how you made them feel. They just didn't understand what they were sensing. You possess a kind of spiritual gravity, and whenever you're near, things simply cannot remain the same. People who wanted to remain asleep felt themselves stirring awake. People who preferred to stay hidden felt exposed. People who valued peace at any cost felt confronted. It wasn't that you were intentionally creating conflict. It was that neutrality simply evaporated in your presence. And this has been both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because you were never meant to waste your life fading into the background. And without this disruptive energy, you might have been tempted to hide forever. A curse because being designed to tip the scales often means you're the one blamed when things fall apart. The truth is, you don't destroy, you reveal. You show where the cracks already existed. You expose what people were desperately trying not to see. But because you're the trigger, they confuse exposure with destruction, and they point the finger at you. The reason you could never find your place in the middle ground is because neutrality is safe, and safety is not your calling. You were made to have an impact, to shake up what's stagnant, and to force choices where people would rather procrastinate. That's why your life has always carried a certain tension. You're not here to keep the balance. You're here to tip it. And deep down, everyone around you knows it, which is why they can't treat you like just anyone. You were born to force sides to show themselves, and in your world, neutrality simply cannot survive. Fourth, they fear your memory more than any words you could speak. They fear the clarity of your memory even more than the power of your voice, because your mind holds on to what most people are desperately trying to erase. While others move on, conveniently forget or rewrite the past to paint themselves in a more flattering light, you've always maintained a razor-sharp awareness of what truly happened. You don't just passively experience life and let it fade into oblivion. You actively archive it. You remember who lied when everyone else swallowed the deception whole. You remember who mistreated you while simultaneously pretending to care. You remember the glaring double standards, the silent betrayals, the whispered truths that never made it into the light. And that memory, sharper than any weaponized word, makes you incredibly dangerous in ways you might not even fully comprehend. What unnerves people is that they can't manipulate you the way they manipulate others. Most systems, whether within families, communities, or society at large, thrive on selective amnesia. They rely on people's willingness to bury the past, to pretend things never happened, to move on without accountability. But you were never built to forget. Even when you offer forgiveness, you don't erase the truth. You carry a living record, not out of bitterness or spite, but because your soul inherently refuses to let lies overwrite the truth. That simple act exposes the rot lurking beneath the polished surfaces. It's not just about memory in the conventional sense, it goes much deeper. You remember things not only with your mind, but with your very spirit. The atmosphere of past events clings to you. You hold on to seemingly insignificant details that others dismiss, and those details become pieces of evidence that reveal patterns others are blind to. While most people are easily fooled by repetition, you recognize the pattern immediately because you've seen it play out before. And that terrifies those who depend on secrecy to survive, because your very presence means their carefully constructed cover story won't hold up. This is why people sometimes avoid you or even harbor resentment toward you. It's not because you've actively spoken out against them, but because they can sense that you know the truth. Your silence doesn't protect them the way it protects others, because even in your silence, your memory testifies against their falsehoods. They sense that you're carrying receipts they can't shred, a living archive that no smear campaign or calculated distraction can ever erase. And so your memory itself becomes a weapon, not because you wield it recklessly, but because the truth it preserves makes corruption, abuse, and hypocrisy impossible to keep buried. That's why they fear your memory even more than your voice. Your words can be twisted and denied, but your quiet knowing cannot. Fifth, you make demons homeless. You disrupt the comfort zones of negative energies, and that's one of the most misunderstood aspects of your life. Everywhere you go, you carry a light that disturbs what's been living comfortably in the shadows. Most environments have their share of parasites, energies, spirits, and mindsets that feed on fear, secrecy, pride, or pain. They thrive because nobody dares to challenge their existence. But when you arrive, they start losing their grip. You don't even have to utter a single word or lift a finger. Your very presence shifts the atmosphere, and suddenly what was hidden starts to feel threatened. That's why hostility often greets you in situations where it makes absolutely no sense. People who don't even know you instinctively dislike you. Teachers, co-workers, even family members treat you as though you've committed some grave offense before you even have a chance to open your mouth. But it was never really you they hated. It was what fell off them when you arrived, the demons, the parasites, the toxic mentalities. They recognized you as the eviction notice the moment you walked in the door, and people who had made peace with those parasitic spirits couldn't distinguish between their own identity and the thing feeding off them, so they interpreted your presence as a personal attack. What makes you so unique is that you don't even have to make an effort. Others engage in elaborate rituals or force uncomfortable confrontations, but you disarm toxic environments simply by existing. It's not a performance, it's a frequency. It's not about effort, it's about your intrinsic essence, and that essence simply doesn't tolerate infestation. Where there's manipulation, you dismantle it. Where there's hypocrisy, you expose it. Where there's oppression, you weaken its foundations. You don't even need to speak on these things, people feel it in their bones. This is also why you've been pushed out of places that couldn't afford to be exposed, toxic workplaces, superficial friendships, even emotionally unhealthy family gatherings. Suddenly you became the problem, even though you weren't the one stirring up drama. The truth is, you didn't bring conflict. You revealed its pre-existing presence. You didn't shatter the peace. You merely uncovered the uncomfortable reality that there was never true peace to begin with. Your life has been a constant reminder that not every battle is fought with fists or fiery words. Some battles are won simply by carrying light into places that thought they could remain shrouded in darkness forever. That's why demons lose their homes when you arrive. They cannot coexist with what you carry within you. And even if the people around you don't fully understand it consciously, their spirits recognize it immediately. With you present, parasites can no longer remain comfortably fed. Consider this a call to embrace your power and use it wisely, for the world needs more people like you to disrupt the darkness and bring forth the light. Now let's move forward and explore more reasons why you are so unique. Number 6, your suffering never translated to compliance. The pain they inflicted on you never broke your spirit, and that's been the biggest shock to everything and everyone who tried to bring you down. Their entire strategy was based on a simple, flawed formula. Apply enough pressure, inflict enough pain, and eventually you'll break. The idea was to crush you so early that you'd never dare to question, never learn to resist, never even consider rising. But what they failed to account for was the fact that your spirit wasn't wired for submission. It was wired for resilience and transformation. Every attempt to shatter you only served to sharpen you instead. Think about it honestly. The moments that should have destroyed you completely ended up teaching you more about yourself than any amount of comfort or ease ever could. Where most people crumble under the weight of betrayal, you learned how to discern genuine character from carefully crafted facades. Where abandonment was supposed to leave you desperate and broken, it forged an unshakable sense of self-reliance and independence within you. Where devastating loss was intended to empty you out completely, it carved out space for deeper wisdom and a more profound understanding of life's fragile beauty. The very scars that were meant to be permanent marks of your weakness became the blueprint for your strength. You carry strategies and life lessons encoded in your very bones that can't be taught in classrooms or churches. They can only be forged in the fiery furnace of intense pain and hardship. The fundamental mistake your enemies made was assuming that pain automatically equates to control. In truth, pain only controls those who lack vision and purpose. You were never blind. Even when you didn't fully understand your purpose, there was an inherent knowing deep within you that suffering could never erase. That's why you didn't break the way they confidently expected you to. They hit you hard, but they didn't hit you smart. They attacked the surface, but they couldn't reach the core of your being. This is what sets you apart from the crowd. Obedience to darkness and negativity never took root within you. You didn't become bitter and resentful as they hoped you would. You didn't become numb and apathetic as they predicted. Instead, you became incredibly precise and discerning. You know what to avoid, who to trust, and how to navigate life's treacherous paths, because every scar is now a hard-earned lesson encoded in your spirit. Your enemies thought they were writing your ending, but they were inadvertently writing your survival manual. So now when they look at you, they see the undeniable proof of their own failure. You're not a pawn to be manipulated. You're not a puppet dancing to their tune. You're the living embodiment of the fact that their plan to break you only served to refine you, and that truth is unbearable for those who invested so much in your destruction, because you were never meant to break. You were only meant to be sharpened, polished, and prepared for your true purpose. Greetings, trailblazers of the unseen path. The most unsettling kind of tempest isn't the one raging on the horizon, but the silent surge that erupts from beneath their very feet. In the realm of psychology, we encounter cognitive dissonance, that jarring discord when the mind confronts a truth it vehemently resisted. You have in essence become a walking embodiment of this phenomenon. A single decisive stroke from you has sent those who believed they had you neatly categorized into a frantic mental spiral, muttering, "What in the world just transpired?" It's not merely that you took them by surprise, you fundamentally altered the very architecture of their perception. The narrative they had meticulously crafted around you erased, their painstakingly assembled opinion reduced to dust. You haven't simply altered the dynamics. You've instilled a profound doubt about their comprehension of the underlying principles. And the irony, while some feign indifference, their sudden obsessive scrutiny of your every action suggests you've become their sole preoccupation. Your actions defied expectation, transcended gradual progression. It was a bolt from the blue, and lightning doesn't seek permission before illuminating the landscape. It etches an indelible mark so deeply that its echoes resonate for generations. So let us dissect the reasons behind their utter lack of preparedness for your recent feat, and the subsequent questioning of everything they believed about you. Firstly, it transcends mere victory. You have redefined the very parameters of success. They anticipated your pursuit of the finish line they had painstakingly constructed. Their assumption was that you could only prevail by adhering to the well-worn path they had trod for years. But instead of charging towards the prize they dangled before you, you deconstructed the conventional understanding of triumph itself. You haven't simply claimed the trophy, you've rendered the trophy obsolete. What unnerves them most is the imperceptible nature of the shift until it was fully realized. Their strategy hinged on predictable responses, a certain move from you met with a predetermined counter. However, when you disregarded their playbook, every meticulously planned countermeasure became futile. You introduced an outcome beyond their capacity to process. This isn't just about shock. You've compelled them to acknowledge the gaping flaws within the very system they championed. They're now trapped in a mental loop, revisiting every interaction, seeking missed clues that you were operating on an entirely different plane. They oscillate between viewing you as a visionary, a menace, or perhaps both. But one thing is certain, they will never underestimate you again. Your maneuver didn't merely expose their short-sightedness, it painfully highlighted the dependence of their so-called expertise on antiquated conditions that crumble under pressure. The sharpest sting for them lies here. Their authority rested on dictating the terms of achievement. By controlling the criteria, they believed they could control the outcome. But your victory circumvented their approval, rendering their validation meaningless. They cannot gatekeep what they cannot quantify. You have demonstrated that true victory lies not in surpassing them within their game, but in rendering their game irrelevant. Now, with each attempt to re-establish their position, they must silently contemplate how to prevent another such disruption. That is the kind of disruption that defies preparation because it originates from an understanding that true power is not bestowed, it is seized. That is the reason for their unease. They haven't merely lost to you, they've lost the comforting illusion of understanding the world's workings, and no strategy manual can rescue them from that. Secondly, you have shattered their meticulously crafted reality. For an extended period, they functioned within a comfortable, self-serving version of reality, one that reinforced their ego, their control, and their worldview. While not necessarily factual, it was convenient, and they embraced it because it shielded them from uncomfortable truths. You have now demolished the foundation of that comfort. With a single action, you expose the artificiality of their cherished reality, revealing its reliance on unfounded assumptions, second-hand information, and illusions they dared not question. The impact was more severe than they anticipated, as individuals rarely recognize their confinement within a bubble until it bursts. The resulting shock stems not merely from the newfound truth, but from the realization of their prolonged reliance on misinformation. They now confront the possibility that their misjudgment extends beyond you, encompassing the systems, individuals, and beliefs upon which they've constructed their lives. This isn't merely unsettling, it's identity-shattering. The most challenging aspect for them is acknowledging that you did not invent the lie, you merely exposed it. The deception is no longer external, it resides within their own reflection. They must now contend with their willing acceptance of a narrative that aligned with their comfort zone despite contradictory evidence. You did not manipulate the truth. You rendered it undeniable, and that is irreversible. This is why they are now questioning everything. If their perception of you, someone they believed they understood, was so flawed, what other areas of their judgment are compromised? Who else have they misjudged? Which purported facts in their lives are merely elaborate fictions? This kind of mental unraveling has no end point. It gnaws at them, destabilizing the very core of their thinking. What truly stings is that you didn't simply challenge their opinion. You rewrote the rules they believed governed truth itself. Once the cracks in their own reality become visible, they cannot be ignored. Every assumption now feels suspect. Every belief feels precarious. They may outwardly project composure, but internally they are navigating a mental earthquake you triggered without uttering a word. Thirdly, you have silently eliminated their favored excuse. For years they have clung to a convenient narrative to rationalize your accomplishments, that you possessed some undisclosed advantage, that fortune smiled upon you, that unseen forces were manipulating events in your favor. It was their protective shield, shielding them from the truth that you toiled for, what you possessed, that you endured hardships they couldn't withstand, and that you persevered when they retreated. That excuse was their security blanket. Without it, they would be compelled to confront their own avoidance of the very dedication and courage required to create something substantial. Then you executed something so irrefutable, so firmly rooted in skill and discipline, that it dismantled every hiding place they occupied. No amount of narrative manipulation could portray it as luck. It was pure ability, resilience, and timing. Attributes that cannot be faked, purchased, or inherited. Suddenly their cherished explanation crumbled. They couldn't claim you had it easy. They couldn't attribute it to handouts. They were forced to acknowledge your merit, and that truth is the most piercing of all. The sting arises from the self-reflection that realization compels. If your triumph was purely earned, what becomes of their own rationalizations? If you ascended without assistance, why do they remain at the base? Your accomplishment serves as a mirror reflecting an unflattering image. It reveals the missed opportunities, the avoided risks, the sacrifices they never made. It exposes that their limitations were self-imposed, not dictated by external forces. They may attempt to downplay it publicly, but privately it consumes them. The disparity between your achievements and their own can no longer be explained away. It is not a matter of unequal opportunities or unfair advantages. It is a matter of will, focus, and consistency. That is the one comparison they cannot win because it demands effort they were unwilling to exert. And now, each time they witness your success, they will experience the quiet ache of knowing they could have strived harder but chose not to. You haven't simply eliminated their excuse, you've deprived them of their ability to hide from themselves. That is a wound that heals slowly, regardless of their outward pretense. Fourthly, you have cast their efforts as mere stalling tactics. They have flaunted their dedication for years, long hours, countless meetings, a constant stream of projects. Superficially, it resembled progress, but in reality, it was largely motion devoid of direction. Then you arrived and with a single decisive action accomplished what all their tireless efforts failed to achieve. It was a jarring disruption. Suddenly their work ethic appears not as commitment, but as a cleverly disguised method of avoiding tangible results. What stings most deeply is the speed and clarity of your actions. You didn't require years of deliberation. You didn't need ideal conditions. You didn't await universal agreement. You identified the objective, acted with precision, and delivered an outcome they couldn't ignore. In contrast, their routines now appear suspiciously like stalling. The kind of busy work that creates the illusion of momentum while perpetually deferring genuine change. This isn't merely embarrassing, it's exposing. You have unveiled the chasm between activity and accomplishment, a chasm they've been hiding within for a long time. Their diligent work was safe. It allowed them to claim progress without ever risking failure. Your actions demonstrated that true progress requires risk, decisiveness, and a willingness to disrupt comfort zones, all of which they've actively avoided. They are now compelled to confront the reality that they've been circling the same starting point while deceiving themselves into believing they were advancing. And the worst part, others see it too. Colleagues, peers, even their silent supporters. They can all discern the difference between your concrete results and their endless preparation cycles. The comparison is unflattering, and no amount of spin can alter that. Deep down, they know they've been delaying under the guise of diligence, and now with your example before them, they cannot deny it. Every future undertaking will be haunted by the unspoken question: am I truly moving forward, or am I merely keeping busy to avoid confronting my fears? That is the uncomfortable truth your actions have brought to light, and it will not be easily forgotten. Fifthly, you have demonstrated that mastery is attainable without their sanction. For a considerable time, they behaved as if they were the gatekeepers. Access to recognition, resources, or influence required their approval. Their identity was built around this role of arbiter, determining who was worthy and who was not. The problem for them is that you have proven their gates were never the only route. In fact, you demonstrated that their path was entirely unnecessary. Your success bears no stamp of their approval, and that is what stings. You sought no permission, you awaited no invitation, you pleaded for no validation. You created something so undeniable that it circumvented their entire system. They were prepared to deny you access, but you generated your own platform, your own audience, your own leverage, and it worked. This shakes their sense of power to its core, suggesting their control was merely an illusion. Now they must confront the uncomfortable reality that authority derived directly from results renders their role as decision-makers obsolete. They cannot discredit your accomplishments without appearing bitter or out of touch, and they cannot claim credit having played no part in them. Each mention of your name serves as a reminder that someone they did not select rose nonetheless. This threatens not only their ego, it threatens their entire system. Gatekeeping is effective only when individuals believe there is no alternative path to success. You have proven otherwise. This alters the mindset of everyone observing. Others who felt obstructed or overlooked now see a different route, creating a ripple effect beyond their control. The worst part for them is their inability to shut down your path, revoke your credentials, which are your results, or exclude you from your own table. You've demonstrated that genuine mastery isn't granted. It's constructed, and once it exists, it requires no validation to stand tall. That truth is irreversible regardless of their desires. Sixthly, you operated in silence until the outcome became irreversible. Your actions were discreet, without announcements, progress reports, or breadcrumbs for them to follow. While they focused on overt moves and open conflicts, you were building quietly beyond their reach. Each decision, each step forward was taken without fanfare. Not from insecurity, but from the understanding that silence is the strongest defense against interference. By the time they became aware of your actions, they were complete. That's what unnerves them most. The finality. There's no chance to impede you, twist the narrative, or obstruct your path. They didn't just lose control over the result, they were excluded from the game entirely. That kind of power is quiet but devastating. It proves that decisive victories don't require public battles. They are accustomed to detecting impending moves, relying on whispers, rumors, and subtle cues for early countermeasures. But you provided nothing, no hints, no warnings, not even a shadow of your plan. That is why your success felt sudden. They were not simply unprepared, they were ambushed. Ambushed individuals react with panic, not strategy. They now replay every event, wondering how you maintained secrecy, who was complicit, and why they missed the signals. The truth is, you didn't need to conceal. You simply owed them no disclosure. You chose to protect your progress until it was unstoppable, demonstrating a level of control they cannot match. The irreversible outcome is the real blow. They cannot undo it, surpass it, or bury it without appearing desperate. Your name is permanently linked to the accomplishment, and history provides no erasers. Each sighting of the results reminds them that while they anticipated a fight, you were quietly winning the war. That kind of move permanently alters their perception of you, ensuring they will never underestimate you again. Seventhly, you have dispelled the myth of replaceability. They have reassured themselves with the belief that no one is indispensable, that your departure would not disrupt the status quo. It was a comforting illusion of power, suggesting they could dismiss anyone without consequence. You have proven them wrong. Your actions revealed that you are not merely a small component. You are the fulcrum upon which everything turns. Your absence or directional shift was the evidence they didn't expect to confront, and the longer they pretended it was inconsequential, the more prominent the flaws became. Now every misstep, delay, and decline in quality underscores your role as the stabilizing force. They cannot spin the situation without acknowledging their struggle, and they cannot conceal it because the results speak louder than their words. This truth is particularly painful because it compels them to acknowledge that their safety net was you. They may downplay it, but they secretly relied on you more than they admitted. And the most unsettling aspect, demonstrating one's irreplaceability permanently shifts the balance of power. They can no longer threaten you with dismissal, having witnessed the collapse of the operation in your absence. That is a fact they can never unlearn, regardless of their efforts. Eighthly, you have forced them to confront the illusion of their control. They operated with the assurance of those who believe they have you figured out. They knew your limits and anticipated your actions, believing they could block any path you chose. That sense of control made them feel invulnerable. However, control is contingent on cooperation. The moment you deviated from their script, their grip loosened and it shattered completely with your latest action. They had built strategies around predictable patterns, assuming you would react within their boundaries. You were expected to seek their approval, operate within their resources, and confine your thinking to their framework. Instead, you transcended that framework, demonstrating your ability to create opportunities beyond their reach. That's when they confronted the uncomfortable truth. Their control was conditional, dependent on your cooperation. Now they questioned the authenticity of their authority, wondering how much was real and how much was a fabrication sustained by convincing people there were no alternatives. You exposed the walls they erected around you as simple fences with open gates. Your departure was unstoppable, and that reality is more impactful than any other action you could have taken. What exacerbates their situation is the public witnessing. Those who once feared their control now see its limitations, altering the entire power dynamic. You didn't just liberate yourself, you shattered the illusion for everyone watching. A broken illusion cannot be rebuilt with the same strength. They may attempt to reassert authority, but it will lack its previous solidity. You demonstrated that imposed limitations are effective only if accepted. Upon your refusal, they relinquish every ounce of perceived control. That truth is unforgettable and unforgivable. Ninthly, you have revealed their years of underestimating you. They operated with a false perception of you, one they embraced to feel superior and secure. They believed they understood you, knew your limits, and could predict your capabilities. You didn't correct them, valuing the advantage of being underestimated. Their arrogance became your shield. The more they perceived you as harmless, the less they prepared for your potential. They ceased close observation, trivialized your importance, and left vulnerabilities they wouldn't have otherwise. That's the mistake they cannot rectify. Your move wasn't merely surprising, it was revelatory. The disparity between their perception and your reality was vast, and they stand on the wrong side, unable to bridge the gap. What unnerves them is that this wasn't a sudden transformation. You are always capable. They simply didn't notice, blinded by their condescension. Now they must confront the fact that their underestimation was a weakness, not a strength. You were outweighing them quietly, building, learning, and preparing while they indulged in their inflated sense of control. Consequently, you were prepared when they weren't. By the time they realized it, it was too late. The worst part is knowing this will never happen again, because they will never underestimate you again. The damage is done. The element of surprise is lost. They've learned that arrogance blinds, that you were never small. You simply allowed them to believe it until it suited you to reveal the truth, and that truth is overwhelming. Tenthly, you have proven that vision surpasses resources every time. They possessed everything deemed necessary for success: connections, wealth, influence. On paper, they were unbeatable. But ultimately, those advantages couldn't replicate your creation. That's because resources without vision are merely raw materials without a blueprint, and you possessed not just a plan, but clarity, focus, and an insight that is not for sale. Your actions demonstrate that money can open doors, but vision builds the house. They could fund projects, hire talent, and leverage influence, yet still fall short. Why? Because they pursued outcomes without comprehending the process. They relied on abundance to compensate for lack of direction, believing that increased resources could replace a lack of understanding. You showed that it doesn't work that way. What strikes them hardest is that vision amplifies the value of resources. So to wrap it all up, the core message here is about the power of authentic action. It's about defying expectations, shattering limiting beliefs, and ultimately claiming your own victory, not just by playing the game better, but by redefining the game itself. It's a reminder that true influence comes not from authority or resources alone, but from the clarity of your vision and the courage to execute it even in silence. It's about creating a reality that speaks for itself. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever experienced a situation where you defied expectations or witnessed someone else do it? What resonated most with you from this breakdown? Please leave a comment below, share your experiences, ask any questions you have, and let's get a discussion going. And if you found this insightful and want to explore more ideas on personal growth, strategic thinking, and challenging the status quo, be sure to subscribe. That way you won't miss out on future videos. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to connecting with you in the comments. Welcome, illuminated souls. The moment you transcend the need for external validation, you become a force to be reckoned with. It's a curious phenomenon. Not laugh out loud funny, but more of an, aha, so this is the landscape realization. Psychological research consistently demonstrates that envy in its raw form ranks as one of the most potent human emotions, often eclipsing gratitude, admiration, and even professed love. And when that force is directed your way, it's seldom a reflection of your misdeeds. It arises from your audacity to thrive in a world that subtly or not so subtly profits from your self-diminishment. You've likely encountered it, the sudden chill in conversations, the pointed glances, the palpable shifts in energy as you enter a space. Initially, you might dismiss it as your imagination playing tricks, but patterns begin to emerge. It's not merely annoyance, it's a deeper unease with your very being. And that's where the revelation becomes powerful. Because you awakened spirit, their animosity-veiled barbs and unpredictable moods have remarkably little to do with any actual transgressions on your part. No, their frustration stems from the undeniable truth that you embody a living testament to the invalidity of their self-imposed limitations. You stand as a constant reminder that the constraints they've embraced are in reality a matter of choice. Some individuals seek refuge in comfortable stagnation, resistant to the call of inspiration. And nothing disrupts that comfort more than witnessing someone who began from a position of disadvantage effortlessly navigating spaces they were conditioned to believe were inaccessible and subsequently commanding presence at the table. So brace yourself. As we delve deeper, you will gain profound clarity into the underlying reasons behind their frustration. Jealousy and the undeniable, albeit often secret, fascination. You'll understand why at their core they recognize it's intrinsically about you. First, their anger is far from arbitrary. It's an involuntary self-disclosure. When individuals react vehemently to you without apparent cause, it signifies more than a mere bad day. It's an unvarnished confession. You've inadvertently struck a nerve they were desperately trying to conceal. Their response is not a random occurrence, but a deeply personal one. It's akin to stumbling upon a hidden chamber within their psyche, a repository of insecurities, unfulfilled aspirations, and disappointments they guard jealously. Without any conscious effort on your part, you've touched a sensitive core, forcing them to confront a pivotal choice, address the root cause, or deflect by attacking the perceived source. Predominantly, individuals opt for the latter, finding it easier to cast aspersions than to confront their internal struggles. Here's the twist. The nerve you've triggered typically has minimal connection to your words or actions. It centers on the essence of who you are, your unwavering confidence, your tenacious resilience, your refusal to confine yourself. These qualities amplify their awareness of the very traits they yearn to cultivate within themselves. To them, you transcend being just another person in the room. You function as a mirror, But unlike a conventional mirror reflecting a carefully curated image, you reflect the unvarnished truth they actively avoid in their private moments. And truth for an unprepared heart can feel like a direct affront. This explains the incongruity of someone smiling amiably in public while harboring resentment behind your back. It's why certain individuals struggle to endure your presence for extended periods. You strip them of their ability to conceal their internal contradictions. You don't even have to utter a single word. Your triumphs, your poise under pressure, your steadfast refusal to be broken by circumstances that would have shattered others. These qualities quietly expose their internal inconsistencies. That's why the intensity of the anger seems disproportionate. You're left wondering, what did I do? While they're grappling with, how dare they remind me of what I could have been? The conflict extends beyond the surface issue. It delves into the unacknowledged truth they wish you didn't embody so effortlessly. And here's where it becomes even more revealing. The vehemence of their reaction directly correlates with the depth of the truth you've unearthed within them. People rarely invest such emotional energy in someone inconsequential. If they're this incensed, it indicates you've already struck a vein of self-doubt buried within the very area they don't want exposed. Second, jealousy serves as disguised recognition. Jealousy possesses a peculiar ability to communicate truth without verbal expression. When people are envious of you, they seldom openly admit it. In fact, most will expend considerable effort to disguise it, employing tactics such as sarcasm, backhanded compliments, sudden aloofness, or exaggerated attempts to diminish your accomplishments. However, a closer examination reveals jealousy as simply recognition in disguise. It's their indirect acknowledgement of, you possess something I desire, and its absence within myself troubles me. The object of their envy isn't always tangible. Certainly it could be the life you've cultivated, the success you've achieved, or the opportunities that have unfolded for you. Yet more frequently, it's something intangible, qualities that defy purchase or imitation. It could be your unwavering self-belief, your ability to recover from setbacks, the inherent authority in your voice, or the inner serenity you maintain even amidst chaos. These qualities possess a magnetic allure unattainable by those who haven't committed to the internal work necessary to cultivate them. That's why jealousy stings so acutely. It highlights the chasm between what they perceive in you and what they experience within themselves. Compounding this intensity is the fact that your strengths often illuminate their weaknesses without any conscious effort on your part. If you radiate confidence upon entering a room, the person battling crippling self-doubt will feel it instantly. If you navigate challenges with composure, the person prone to spiraling over minor setbacks will take note. And if you live authentically, those still hidden behind facades will recognize in you a freedom they secretly long for. That silent recognition morphs into gnawing irritation because your mere existence serves as irrefutable proof that their excuses are precisely that, excuses. This is why jealousy rarely stems from any wrongdoing on your part. It's rooted in your role as a living embodiment of their unrealized potential. That's a difficult realization for some to accept. Thus, rather than seeking to learn from you, they choose to resent you. Ironically, their jealousy is a veiled form of respect they are too prideful to acknowledge. It signifies they recognize your value even if they never articulate it. And whether they acknowledge it or not, they've tacitly recognized that you're ahead of the curve because you possess qualities they cannot dismiss. Third, they don't envy your possessions. They envy your capacity to truly live. Frequently, people assume jealousy centers on material possessions, the car, the house, the career, the lifestyle. But in most cases, it extends far beyond those superficial elements. What they truly envy is your ability to navigate life on your own terms. It's your capacity to face challenges with unwavering resolve, to make decisions without succumbing to pressure, and to persevere without sacrificing your sense of self. That's the aspect they struggle to comprehend, because it's the skill they haven't yet mastered for themselves. Some individuals possess greater material wealth than you, yet still resent your happiness. Why? Because happiness isn't a byproduct of accumulation. It's the outcome of self-awareness and the unwavering commitment to protect your inner spirit from life's attempts to diminish it. Some amass fortunes but lack inner peace. Others wield influence but experience no genuine joy. You might not possess their material wealth, but you possess something far more rare, the ability to safeguard your soul regardless of life's challenges. This is why your resilience feels threatening to them. They've been conditioned to believe that life should break you when it becomes arduous. Yet you've demonstrated that it doesn't have to. You've navigated seasons that would have left them embittered, emerging instead wiser and more grounded. To them, that seems almost unnatural, challenging the narratives they tell themselves about their inability to change or overcome certain circumstances. They may try to downplay your accomplishments or portray your life as unimpressive, but deep down, they recognize it's not about the things you've acquired, it's about the person you've become. And that's the aspect they cannot purchase, imitate, or borrow: your strength, your perspective, your emotional resilience. Those are the true treasures. They enable you to maintain composure amidst turmoil, discover solutions where others perceive only dead ends, and safeguard your identity when the world attempts to dismantle it. That's why the jealousy runs so deep. You are living proof that serenity, confidence, and strength are attainable without the need for perfect conditions. And for someone who clings to the belief that the world must change before they can find happiness, that's the most confronting truth they'll ever encounter. Fourth, your very presence throws light on their neglected opportunities. There's a particular discomfort that arises when your presence serves as a reminder of the life they could have lived, but didn't. It's not always simple envy. It's regret masquerading as irritation. Every time they see you thriving, taking bold steps, or inhabiting a reality you built through risk and persistence, they're compelled to confront an uncomfortable truth. Those same opportunities might have been within their reach, but they chose inaction. That realization carries a heavy weight. Because while they might attribute blame to circumstances, timing, or other individuals, deep down, they understand the true reason they didn't seize the moment. They allowed fear to deter them, or pride convinced them the opportunity wasn't worthy. Now you stand as living, breathing proof of what could have transpired had they been willing to embrace the unknown. What intensifies this is that your successes render their what-if questions impossible to silence. Without your example, they could have convinced themselves that pursuing certain dreams was destined to fail. However, with you standing before them personifying success, that illusion shatters. You've stripped them of their excuses, and rather than drawing inspiration, some individuals choose resentment, finding it easier to direct anger toward you than to confront their missed opportunity. You didn't set out to become their reminder. You were simply living your life authentically, making choices aligned with your inner compass. Yet to them, each achievement of yours functions as a personal spotlight on their inaction. Every risk you took that yielded positive results becomes a quiet accusation, not from you, but from their own conscience. That's why they might maintain distance, minimize your progress, or pretend not to notice your growth. It's a self-protective mechanism. By avoiding you, they can avoid the uncomfortable truth you represent. However, the core fact persists. Your mere existence highlights the contrast between living boldly and living cautiously. And while some might eventually utilize that truth as motivation to rewrite their own narrative, others remain stagnant, nurturing a bitterness rooted not in your actions but in the life they could have attained had they chosen courage over comfort. Fifth, their bitterness is ignited by your freedom. Freedom is universally proclaimed as desirable until it manifests in the life of another. When you act according to your beliefs without worrying about others' approval, you reveal how restrained some people are. They may appear to be independent, but the truth is that they are influenced by family, co-workers, and even strangers. Your freedom makes them see their shackles. Many don't want to face that reality. They're not always disagreeing with your choices. They just want to be as bold as you are without caring what others think. You dress however you like, ignoring trends. You speak your mind freely, not needing others' permission. You take risks that make sense to you regardless of others' opinions. You live life according to your own compass, not societal norms. Because others believe actions must be justified, they see your freedom as rebelliousness. Your freedom doesn't cause them harm, it should inspire them. But to those who are caged, seeing another fly is painful. They're not angry because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something they wish they could. Your life shatters the illusion that worth comes from outside approval. Furthermore, your freedom removes their excuses. They can't say, "Nobody can do that," when you've done it. They can't argue that society's views are unbreakable when you've ignored them and still succeeded. That truth makes them uncomfortable. Often people resent those who force them to change their way of life. It's not that you're breaking rules, you're showing they were never real. Once people realize this, they must change their lives or live knowing they held the key to their own cage all along. Sixth, you hold power without their approval. Most are led to believe that power is granted to you by others. You have to be liked, picked, or endorsed to matter. They seek acceptance, seeing it as influence's door. When they meet someone who doesn't need the crowd, it surprises and destabilizes them. You acted like royalty before being crowned. You didn't wait for a seal of approval. You didn't adjust to a gatekeeper's checklist. Instead, you gained credibility, acted with authority, and refused to shrink. That threatens those who base their worth on being liked because it challenges how they feel important. The worst part is that your power isn't up for negotiation. Publicly granted power can be taken away quickly. A rumor or changed opinion can ruin it. However, power based on character, resilience, knowledge, and consistency can't be taken. That makes you unbeatable, as they'd have to rebuild themselves to match you. People may try to challenge, discredit, or undermine you. They need to see your power as fake or weak because the alternative that you built it and don't need them forces them to realize they've sought weak power. You contradict their view of the world. You prove influence isn't an award. It's something you take and show. For those waiting for permission, that's intimidating and enraging, as they realize they could have done the same all along but didn't. Seventh, they see you succeeding where they hoped you would fail. People get especially frustrated when what they thought would destroy you becomes your greatest strength. They expected you to break in the storm, to lose yourself in chaos, to disappear so they could finish your story. Instead, you adapted and learned. You did more than survive. You emerged taller, clearer, and more sure than before. That reversal eats at them without them admitting it. When someone secretly hopes you fail, it's not always malicious. Sometimes your failure would justify their own fears. Your downfall would confirm that trying is pointless, that the odds are insurmountable, and that it's safer to risk nothing. But you didn't fall. You proved the opposite. You showed it's possible to face the storm and still win. That's not just inconvenient, it's deeply unsettling, as they now have to ask whether their limits are real or self-imposed. What stings more is your confidence after what was meant to break you. Surviving is one thing, keeping your head high is another. That strength can't be faked, it's earned. Every smile, calm decision, and step forward reminds them that they underestimated you. Their envy is sharp, not casual. You didn't just prove them wrong, you did it publicly. You let the storm do its worst, but still refused to shrink. Now, instead of your downfall, they must watch a story of resilience and victory. Those who doubted you are disarmed when you thrive where they thought you'd drown because you weren't meant to make it. Yet here you are, proving not only that you could, but that you were made for it. Eighth, you prove their excuses were always just excuses. People cling to excuses. They say the timing isn't right, the resources aren't there, the odds are too great, or people like me can't do certain things. These stories become comfortable because they avoid pressure to try. When you succeed despite obstacles, it doesn't just inspire. It threatens the stories they've told themselves for years. Your success contradicts their narrative. You may have started with less, had fewer connections, or faced more setbacks, yet you moved forward. That makes them uncomfortable, showing there was never a wall, just a choice. Admitting that means facing that they held themselves back. Instead of being motivated, many resent you. Resentment dismisses your achievements instead of learning from them. They say they must have had help, or they just got lucky. Instead of facing that, discipline, risk, and persistence played the biggest roles. That way they keep their excuses without changing. You likely weren't trying to prove anything to them. You were living your life taking chances and working hard. In doing so, you exposed the gap between what's possible and what they've settled for. That gap is uncomfortable, demanding a choice: grow or stay stuck. Most stay stuck as change requires effort and giving up excuses. Resentment becomes the shield they hide behind. But they know the truth: if you could do it, they could have tried. That's why they watch you closely, not to celebrate, but to find any flaw to make your rise less confronting. The problem is the proof you represent can't be undone. Ninth, you refuse to wear the guilt they project onto you. Some are uncomfortable with your success and that you won't apologize for it. They think anyone who rises above should tone it down, hide it, or explain themselves so others don't feel less. When you don't, you break a rule, throwing them off balance. They use guilt as a leash to pull you back. When you don't take the bait, it drives them mad. They say, "You've changed. Don't forget where you came from." Or you think you're better than everyone. The goal isn't discussion, it's to plant self-doubt. If they make you question yourself, they slow you down. Guilt is control, keeping you small enough to make them comfortable. Your refusal to carry that guilt is threatening, as they can't hold it over you. Manipulators can't handle someone who sees through it and walks away untouched. You're immune to their tactics, and you're showing others it's possible to be immune. That's dangerous to those who thrive on control. By rejecting their guilt, you send a message. You're allowed to succeed without apologizing. You're allowed to stand out without shrinking, and you're allowed to choose your path without justifying it to anyone. That kind of living makes some furious, dismantling the social dynamic where they decide who's allowed to shine. At its core, this isn't arrogance, it's boundaries. You've decided you won't dim your light just to make others more comfortable in their shadows. And while that choice might cost you approval in certain circles, it gives you something far more valuable: the freedom to live without being chained to someone else's insecurities. So to bring it all together, remember this: the friction you sometimes encounter isn't a reflection of your flaws, but a testament to your strength. It's about the light you shine, the courage you embody, and the potential you inspire in others, even if they're not quite ready to acknowledge it. Embrace your journey, continue to rise, and never apologize for living a life that sets your soul on fire. Now I'd love to hear from you. What resonated most with you in this exploration? Have you experienced any of these dynamics firsthand? Leave a comment down below. I'm eager to read your thoughts and continue this conversation. And if you found this helpful, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future discussions that can help you navigate life's complexities and truly shine. Until next time, keep thriving. Thriving, thriving, thriving. Welcome the anointed ones. The devil doesn't come with horns. He comes with a plan, a smile, and receipts forged in flattery. They believed they had you cornered, not maybe, not possibly. They were so confident they already envisioned the celebration of your downfall. But what they failed to understand is that a chosen one doesn't stumble blindly into a trap. A chosen one meticulously studies the footsteps leading to it. intuitively senses the insidious energy behind it and scans the invisible ink woven between every seemingly innocuous word. And oh, you saw it all, the subtle tone shifts, the overly rehearsed kindness, the suspiciously generous offers, the sudden unwarranted spotlight, the string of carefully orchestrated coincidences. They constructed their snare with meticulous detail, but you perceived the underlying malice, not just the polished facade. Here's a potent truth for you. Studies in psychology reveal that individuals with heightened empathy often become remarkably adept at detecting deception, not because they are inherently paranoid, but because they possess the capacity to perceive micro-expressions and subtle emotional undercurrents that elude the awareness of others. Translation: they chose the wrong adversary, played the wrong game with the wrong soul, and now they are consumed by impotent fury. Why? Because their carefully laid plan didn't just fail, it failed spectacularly and publicly. They were counting on your silence, your disorientation, your tears of despair. But instead you met their treachery with unwavering stillness, crystalline clarity, and that knowing smile that speaks volumes, a chilling declaration of, "I saw you the whole time." So brace yourselves, because in this message we're about to dissect the spiritual anatomy of betrayal, the meticulously crafted trap that was designed to annihilate you, and how you masterfully flipped it with a divine countermove, like a reverse Uno card dealt straight from the hand of Providence. And fear not, we are not going to sugarcoat a single bitter truth. This isn't cotton candy, it's raw, unadulterated fire. Let's delve into it. Number one, they fundamentally mistook your sensitivity for stupidity. But you were deciphering the very blueprint of their deception in real time. They tragically underestimated you, believing that your empathy equaled naivete. They assumed that because you listened more than you vocalized, you were oblivious to their machinations. They observed your capacity to care deeply for others, your inclination to extend the benefit of the doubt, and mistakenly concluded that you were slow-witted, gullible, and easily manipulated. But what they profoundly failed to grasp was that you were meticulously tracking every detail, not just with your ears, but with the discerning acuity of your spirit. While they were performing their elaborate charade, weaving their lies and scheming in the shadows behind your back, you were diligently absorbing patterns, every blatant inconsistency, every subtly unsettling energy shift, every hollow, insincere laugh, and every furtive sideways glance. You were not clueless. You were silently compiling evidence, building an airtight case. And they arrogantly assumed they had you completely under their control simply because you chose not to expose their treachery immediately. But you perceived everything, not just their spoken words, but the hidden intent lurking beneath them. Not just their outward actions, but the nefarious motivations fueling them. You weren't being overly emotional. You were actively decoding the complex dynamics of spiritual warfare in real time. They failed to comprehend that your silence wasn't indicative of confusion. It was a deliberate act of calculation. You were engaged in a long-term strategic game. You weren't concerned with winning petty arguments or proving them wrong in the moment. You were strategically allowing them to venture further and further into the labyrinth of their own creation, fully aware that any premature confrontation would only result in them twisting the narrative, vehemently denying their actions, and ultimately portraying you as the unstable one. So you patiently waited. You vigilantly watched. You offered a knowing smile. You allowed them to revel in their perceived victory. They meticulously studied your outward behavior. You delved into the depths of their souls. That is the reason behind their current incandescent fury. Because when you finally made your move, when you finally unveiled the truth from behind the carefully constructed curtain, you didn't just expose a single isolated lie. You systematically dismantled the entire elaborate system they had painstakingly constructed around deceiving you. And it wasn't a dramatic, emotionally charged meltdown. It wasn't fueled by a desire for petty revenge. It was executed with unwavering clarity, serene calmness, and surgical precision. The very same gentleness they erroneously mistook for weakness became the instrument of their devastating undoing. Because when a chosen one finally articulates what they have witnessed, it is already far too late to spin the narrative or mitigate the damage. They arrogantly believed you were unintelligent because you didn't react in the manner they anticipated. But you weren't unintelligent. You were strategically 10 steps ahead of their every move. And now that they are acutely aware that you were privy to their scheme from the very beginning, they are not merely embarrassed, they are consumed by a chilling fear. Because if you detected this elaborate deception, they are plagued by the unsettling question of what other transgressions you have witnessed and what knowledge you are currently keeping to yourself. Number 2, you strategically allowed them to complete the setup, ensuring there would be no escape from the inevitable exposure. You permitted them to finalize their machinations not because you were oblivious to their actions, but because you were acutely aware of every intricate detail. You meticulously observed the unfolding of their meticulously crafted plan step by calculated step, and rather than prematurely intervening, you deliberately watched it all play out. They erroneously assumed you were blind to their treachery. They naively believed you were being easily lured into their carefully constructed trap, but you possessed an unwavering awareness of their actions, and you purposefully allowed them to continue unabated. Why? Because you grasped a fundamental principle that eluded their comprehension. Comprehensive exposure necessitates the culmination of the scheme. Had you prematurely called them out on their duplicity, they would have vehemently denied everything feigned ignorance and expertly flipped the narrative to their advantage. They would have skillfully portrayed you as paranoid or overly dramatic. And most devastatingly, they would have successfully evaded accountability yet again. So you deliberately allowed them to bask in their illusion of victory. You allowed them to completely discard their masks, revealing their true malevolent intentions. You permitted them to construct their trap with such meticulous detail that they would be utterly unable to extricate themselves from its binding embrace when the full force of the truth finally crashed down upon them. You observed the intricate coordination of their efforts, the feigned expressions of concern, the forced and unnatural generosity, the sudden suspiciously convenient interest in the minutiae of your life. You intuitively recognized that it was all meticulously staged. You skillfully picked up on the dissonant energy emanating from their words, the palpable disconnect between their spoken pronouncements and their underlying body language. And instead of directly confronting their deception, you maintained a deliberate silence. You refrained from interrupting their carefully constructed performance. You allowed the full plot to meticulously develop, fully aware that the more rope they were given, the more securely they would ensnare themselves in their own web of deceit. And now they find themselves utterly incapable of offering any plausible explanation. The evidence is far too detailed, too overwhelmingly obvious, too meticulously calculated to be dismissed. Their hands are indelibly stained with guilt, and there is no amount of scrubbing that can ever restore their pristine appearance. And that is what fuels their incandescent rage, because not only did their elaborate plan fail in spectacular fashion, but they are acutely aware that you were silently observing them the entire time, like an unflinching mirror reflecting their depravity back at them. And while they were painstakingly setting the stage to witness your downfall, they inadvertently ended up placing a blinding spotlight on their own insidious actions. You didn't inadvertently stumble into their trap. You strategically allowed them to construct it meticulously around their own feet. And when it inevitably collapsed under the weight of its own deceit, they were utterly unprepared for the fact that you had already achieved inner peace with the prospect of walking away completely. That is the element that is driving them to the brink of madness. You didn't react with histrionic displays of emotion. You didn't resort to pleading or begging. You didn't desperately fight to remain in a situation that was inherently toxic. You calmly and deliberately walked away with unwavering clarity while they were left standing amidst the wreckage of their failed plot, burdened by an unshakable guilt they are incapable of articulating, surrounded by incriminating evidence they cannot erase, and trapped within a narrative they can no longer control. Number 3, the trap they so meticulously designed was tailored to exploit your former self, but you have irrevocably transcended that person. The trap they so painstakingly set for you was not a random haphazard endeavor. It was strategically designed based on the version of you they believed they once knew, the individual who craved love and acceptance to such an extent that you were willing to tolerate egregious disrespect, the individual who habitually suppressed her own voice in a misguided attempt to maintain a false sense of peace. The individual who consistently ignored glaring red flags because you desperately wanted to avoid the perceived pain of starting over. That is precisely who they targeted. That is the carefully constructed mold for which they tailored the entire setup. But there is just one significant problem with their flawed premise. You have quietly and resolutely outgrown that person, leaving her behind without announcing your evolution to them. They meticulously studied your past, neglecting to observe your present reality. They remained completely oblivious to the fact that the very pain they inflicted upon you became the crucible in which you forged the unwavering discernment necessary to see straight through individuals like them. You had already endured far too much to ever fall prey to the same destructive patterns again. While they were relying on outdated information to fuel their plot, you were actively cultivating updated discernment, establishing impenetrable boundaries, and embracing a resilient mindset that could no longer be manipulated by insincere words or the deceptive familiarity of treacherous faces. They arrogantly believed they could bait you with the same tired tactics. Hollow empty promises, manipulative guilt trips, feigned expressions of loyalty, or the insidious exploitation of shared trauma bonding. They pathetically thought that if they merely reminded you of your former self, you would shrink back into that vulnerable persona, desperately seeking their validation and acceptance. But you resolutely refused. You stood firm in your hard-earned growth, even if it meant severing ties with individuals you once would have sacrificed everything to keep within your sphere of influence. And when you didn't react in the predictable manner they had so confidently anticipated, it completely derailed their entire scheme. They were expecting the emotionally reactive version of you, the excessively forgiving, overly understanding individual who was prone to rationalizing the inexcusable. They were counting on the person who would have instinctively engaged in endless self-explanation, second-guessed her own intuition, and readily shouldered the blame in a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. But that person simply no longer exists, and that is precisely the reason their elaborate plan imploded in spectacular fashion. They set the trap for a ghost, a figment of their outdated imagination. And you emerged as an entirely different entity, a force they have never possessed the ability to manipulate or control. Now they are not merely angry, they are profoundly confused and disoriented. They are left sitting amidst the crumbling wreckage of a carefully orchestrated plan that was intended to break you, desperately struggling to comprehend how everything went so catastrophically wrong. But deep down, they are acutely aware of the fundamental truth: you didn't fall victim to their treachery because you are no longer the person they once knew. Growth served as your unwavering shield. Maturity became your impenetrable armor, and the divine hand of God upon your life ensured that their carefully constructed setup was no match for the formidable strength you quietly cultivated in the darkest of hours. Number 4, they weaponized what they perceived they knew about you, but you strategically utilized what they consistently ignored about you. They meticulously weaponized what they thought they knew about you. They ruthlessly exploited the fragmented pieces of your past like ammunition. Your childhood traumas, your deepest insecurities, the instances in which you extended your trust too readily, the inevitable mistakes you made when you lacked the knowledge or experience to navigate challenging situations more effectively. They callously seized upon all of it and attempted to transform it into a strategic advantage. They arrogantly believed that if they merely pressed on those same unhealed wounds, you would predictably react in the same vulnerable manner you had exhibited in the past. That was the foundation of their entire manipulative strategy. Your predictable pain response. They dredged up your family history, highlighting the dysfunction, the pervasive silence, the recurring patterns of abandonment. They naively figured that if they successfully mirrored those deeply ingrained patterns, you would instinctively revert to a state of emotional numbness. They meticulously studied your emotional habits, your attachment style, your underlying fears, and they painstakingly constructed a trap designed to exploit those fragile aspects of your being that had previously buckled under immense pressure. But here's what they failed to anticipate: you had also engaged in a comprehensive study of yourself too. And you approached this profound self-exploration with healing and genuine self-understanding as your primary objectives rather than the insidious desire to manipulate or control. While they remained obsessively fixated on the version of you that desperately craved closure and validation from external sources, you were actively engaged in the transformative process of becoming the version of you that no longer felt the need for their insincere apologies. They presumptuously believed you still needed them for validation, for unwavering support, for unconditional love. But what they conveniently ignored, or perhaps were simply incapable of perceiving, was that you had been diligently building a quiet, unshakable foundation of faith and self-reliance grounded in the unwavering support of God. You made the conscious decision to cease running endlessly in unproductive circles, and instead you began walking purposefully in alignment with your divinely ordained path. That profound shift in perspective remained invisible to them because they only superficially observed your outward actions, neglecting to delve into the depths of your evolving spirit. You skillfully flipped the script by strategically utilizing the very qualities they consistently failed to acknowledge: your innate discernment, your heightened ability to sense subtle shifts in energy, your unwavering self-awareness, the profound understanding that you no longer need to engage in heated arguments to affirm your own inherent rightness, the capacity to listen intently with your soul rather than simply with your ears. That is the element they utterly failed to anticipate. They were meticulously prepared for a protracted and emotionally charged conflict. You responded with the disarming power of inner peace. They were actively seeking to provoke drama and chaos. You strategically responded with a deliberate silence, and not the kind of silence that stems from weakness or fear, but the kind of potent silence that deeply terrifies individuals who are accustomed to manipulating and controlling others. They confidently wielded what they mistakenly believed they knew about you, but you achieved victory by strategically utilizing what they never bothered to learn or understand. Your power was not derived from the stridency of your comeback. It was rooted in the serene calmness of your unwavering spiritual alignment. They underestimated everything they simply didn't take the time to truly study. And that is precisely why the weapon they so carefully formed ultimately failed to prosper against you. Number 5, you didn't merely outsmart them on a superficial level. You unmasked the true puppet masters pulling the strings from behind the scenes. You didn't simply outmaneuver the individuals who were directly confronting you. You delved far deeper than they ever anticipated. While they remained narrowly focused on baiting you, distracting you, or attempting to manipulate your emotions, you were diligently tracing the strings of their deception back to their ultimate source. This wasn't solely about adroitly dodging drama or cutting off toxic relationships for the sake of self-preservation. This was about exercising discernment at the highest and most profound level. You didn't just passively observe what they were overtly doing. You actively sought to identify who was truly orchestrating their actions. From behind the carefully constructed facade, the individual moves were far too calculated, the timing of events was far too specific and precise. The recurring patterns were far too familiar to be dismissed as mere coincidence. You started meticulously picking up on subtle spiritual fingerprints, discerning the unseen hand at play. Certain conversations felt intuitively off, radiating an unsettling energy. Certain individuals consistently appeared at pivotal moments, reciting the same empty, scripted lines. You recognized that you were not merely being targeted by individual actors. You were being subjected to a far more pervasive and insidious spiritual test. And while the vast majority of individuals would have become hopelessly entangled in the turbulent emotions of betrayal, you resolutely maintained your composure, choosing instead to remain silent and vigilantly observe the unfolding of their strategic machinations. You began to recognize that some of these individuals were not thinking or acting independently. They were being manipulated and exploited, spiritually hijacked by unseen forces, whether through the influence of witchcraft, unresolved ancestral debts, deeply entrenched generational strongholds, or the detrimental effects of unhealthy soul ties. They were unknowingly carrying out orders they did not fully comprehend. They were mere pawns, strategically moved across the board by unseen forces that had been meticulously studying your bloodline for years. That is precisely why the attacks felt so profoundly personal and targeted. That is precisely why they possessed such an uncanny ability to strike at your most vulnerable points. But here's where everything dramatically shifted in your favor. You consciously chose to cease reacting impulsively, and instead you deliberately started observing with detached clarity. You stopped focusing on the surface-level insult and began seeking to understand the underlying spiritual assignment behind it. And when you made that crucial shift in perspective, the carefully constructed masks began to slip, revealing the truth beneath. You saw the true handlers, the invisible influences, the insidious spirits of jealousy, sabotage, and constant monitoring. You caught a glimpse of the real enemy, and you refused to flinch or cower in fear. You recognized that this wasn't simply a relational conflict to be resolved through human means. This was a manifestation of spiritual warfare cleverly disguised in human form. And that is when you decisively ceased playing defense. You stopped investing your energy in attempting to fix or rehabilitate individuals who were never intended to be genuinely fixed. You started praying with strategic intention, declaring divine truths with unwavering fire, and deliberately walking away without carrying any residual burden of guilt. You didn't merely survive their attempted manipulation. You courageously exposed the entire interconnected network of malevolent energy that was operating behind the scenes. Now they are not simply infuriated that you didn't fall victim to their schemes. They are gripped by sheer terror that you saw through their deception. Because once you have identified the true puppeteer, the game is irrevocably over. And they know with chilling certainty that you perceived everything. Number 6, they meticulously crafted the perfect performance. But you were already in possession of the script long before opening night. They genuinely believed they had successfully deceived you. Every word they uttered was carefully rehearsed and practiced. Every action was meticulously timed and executed with precision. Every calculated gesture, every studied expression, every manufactured display of concern was an integral component of their painstakingly crafted performance. They were engaging in elaborate theatrics, expertly playing the roles of victim, hero, friend, and unwavering supporter. Behind the scenes, they were diligently setting you up for inevitable failure while simultaneously feigning an unwavering commitment to having your best interests at heart. And to any unsuspecting observer, their charade likely appeared convincingly genuine. But what they failed to realize was that you were already in possession of the script. You foresaw their impending betrayal long before the first line was even delivered. The Holy Spirit had already revealed their insidious intentions to you in moments of quiet contemplation. Through vivid and unsettling dreams, through persistent and unshakable gut feelings, through sudden and inexplicable shifts in your spirit that simply could not be ignored. You didn't initially possess tangible empirical proof, but on a deeper spiritual level, the confirmation was both unmistakable and resounding. So you patiently watched and you strategically waited. You weren't surprised when the lies began to unravel, exposing the truth. You weren't caught off guard when they intentionally twisted your words or when individuals suddenly turned against you without apparent cause. You had already foreseen it all in your mind's eye. You already possessed an intuitive understanding of how their treachery would play out. You strategically allowed it to unfold, not because you were inherently weak or powerless, but because you were deliberately allowing them to fully reveal their true malevolent selves. You understood that if you reacted prematurely, they would skillfully spin the narrative to their advantage, thereby obscuring the truth. So you granted them the stage, provided them with an audience, and permitted them to perform their elaborate drama to its inevitable conclusion. They painstakingly planted props, fabricated false evidence, exchanged manipulative fake text messages, and engaged in deliberately misleading conversations. They attempted to tightly control the prevailing narrative, but you understood that you didn't need to actively defend yourself because the truth operates according to its own divinely ordained timeline. And you embraced a profound and empowering understanding. When God grants you foresight, your designated role isn't to disrupt or prematurely interrupt the unfolding drama. Rather, it is to allow it to fully run its course, thereby ensuring that divine justice possesses all the necessary evidence to render a fair and righteous judgment. You never truly belonged on their stage in the first place. The moment you caught a glimpse of their carefully constructed script, you detached emotionally and spiritually. You effectively clocked out of their performance while they remained under the arrogant illusion that they still held your unwavering attention. And when the final scene inevitably arrived, you didn't offer a polite round of applause. You didn't succumb to tears of despair. You simply and silently walked off their stage without uttering a single word, because you already possessed complete knowledge of how their self-serving drama would ultimately conclude. And you resolved to cease allowing individuals to audition for roles in a story that God had never written for them in the first place. Number 7. You strategically allowed the snake to slither closer, affording you the precise opportunity to decisively sever its head. You possessed an unwavering understanding of precisely what was unfolding the moment the subtle shift began to manifest. The overall tone changed subtly but perceptibly. The collective energy became palpably strange and unsettling. The previously consistent communication abruptly ceased, replaced by a pregnant and suspicious silence. You could acutely sense the brewing betrayal, not because you were succumbing to unwarranted paranoia, but because you were operating with a heightened state of spiritual alertness that simply cannot be taught or acquired through conventional means. But instead of reacting impulsively or emotionally, you engaged in a course of action that they simply weren't expecting at all. You resolutely remained still and composed. You deliberately allowed them to draw even closer to you. You permitted them to entertain the arrogant belief that you were utterly clueless and unaware of their machinations. You let them arrogantly assume they had you precisely where they wanted you. They mistakenly interpreted your unwavering stillness as a sign of inherent weakness. They erroneously believed your calculated quietness stemmed from fear or trepidation. But it was neither of those things. It was a deliberate act of strategic timing. You weren't merely reacting emotionally. You were actively engaged in a comprehensive process of calculation. You were vigilantly observing how they subtly moved, how they repeatedly lied, and how they meticulously coordinated with others behind your back to undermine you. You were meticulously tracking every detail without uttering a single word of protest or accusation. And while they smugly believed they were wrapping you ever tighter within the confines of their deceptive scheme, you were simply waiting for the perfect, divinely ordained moment to strike with decisive precision. You embraced an understanding that eludes the vast majority of people. It is not necessarily about reacting first or striking the initial blow. It is about achieving maximum impact by hitting with unwavering accuracy at the precise right moment. You didn't feel compelled to prematurely expose their treachery. You didn't feel the need to scream hysterically or desperately beg for the truth to be revealed. You patiently waited until the trap was undeniably clear, the pattern of deceit was irrefutably established, and the accumulated evidence could no longer be plausibly denied. Then you moved swiftly, decisively, and without any advance warning. They never saw it coming. That is precisely what shook them to their very core. With a single perfectly executed move, you dismantled everything they had been painstakingly building in secret. Because while they were arrogantly banking on your predictable emotional responses, you were strategically sitting on a wealth of carefully considered information. You weren't passively asleep. You were vigilantly watching and waiting for the opportune moment to act. And when the moment finally arrived, you decisively cut their deceit off at its very root, ensuring its complete and permanent eradication. Now they are left feeling profoundly confused, deeply embarrassed, and desperately scrambling to salvage their shattered reputations because they operated under the mistaken assumption that they possessed significantly more time. They arrogantly believed they could continue manipulating you indefinitely, continue maintaining their deceptive pretense, and continue slithering around undetected in the shadows. But you deliberately allowed the snake to draw close to you, not to entertain it or engage with it in any meaningful way, but to ultimately eliminate it with surgical precision when the time was right. You didn't strike out of blind rage or a thirst for petty revenge. You struck with the unwavering clarity of divine revelation. And that is what makes their defeat sting with even greater intensity, because deep down, they are acutely aware of the fundamental truth: you were never truly in the dark about their machinations. You were simply allowing them to walk willingly into the radiant light where every hidden transgression would inevitably be exposed for all to see. Number 8, they confidently counted on your inherent kindness to compel you to remain silent, but you made the conscious decision to prioritize divine justice over the fleeting and ultimately hollow approval of other people. They arrogantly assumed that you would never publicly speak out against their actions. They were certain that your inherent kindness would inevitably compel you to bite your tongue, just to maintain a semblance of superficial peace, just to avoid any potential conflict or confrontation, just to protect their carefully constructed reputations from being tarnished. And for a significant period of time, you did precisely that. You consistently extended them the benefit of the doubt, rationalizing their behavior and letting their transgressions slide without holding them accountable. You repeatedly told yourself that confronting their actions simply wasn't worth the potential drama it would inevitably create. You diligently kept secrets that were never yours to carry in the first place, all because you didn't want to be the one responsible for causing everything to unravel. But it wasn't genuine peace that you were actively protecting. It was merely their carefully constructed image of respectability. And deep down, you intuitively knew it. You could feel it resonating within your spirit every time you deliberately silenced your own voice to keep others comfortable and avoid causing any potential disruption. They were strategically hiding behind your inherent goodness, cynically exploiting your silence as a protective shield while simultaneously continuing to engage in their deplorable behavior in the shadows. They were confidently banking on the fact that you were far too loyal, too loving, and too devout to ever publicly call them out on their duplicity. That is where they tragically miscalculated their approach, because you didn't merely reach a breaking point. You experienced a profound spiritual awakening that irrevocably transformed your perspective. You realized that God did not call you to be a passive peacekeeper at all costs. Rather, He called you to be a fearless carrier of truth, no matter the potential consequences. You came to understand that passively protecting wickedness through silence effectively renders you a silent partner in their insidious actions. That profound revelation struck you with tremendous force. And once it did, everything within you began to fundamentally shift and change. You ceased caring about maintaining their carefully constructed image of respectability. You stopped protecting individuals who would never extend the same courtesy to you. You stopped blindly bowing to the false idol of misplaced loyalty and resolutely began standing in unwavering divine alignment. And that is when the seeds of fear began to germinate within them, because they could no longer effectively control you through manipulative guilt or intimidation. They could no longer exploit you through the cynical deployment of fake expressions of love. They could no longer effectively hide behind the protective shield of your self-imposed silence. When you strategically began prioritizing truth over superficial comfort, obedience to God over maintaining a fabricated image, and genuine justice over the perpetuation of pretense, it shook them to their very core. not because you exposed them with a burning desire for vengeance, but because you did it with unwavering clarity, serene calmness, and unshakable confidence. The kind of divine confidence that can only originate from God. You didn't lash out with uncontrolled anger. You didn't engage in retaliatory behavior. You simply stood firm in what you knew to be morally right and just allowing the radiant light of truth to do what it invariably does, expose what was never intended to remain hidden in the shadows. They never expected you to publicly speak out against their actions, but you did. And it wasn't a loud, bombastic display of rage. It was a measured and purposeful act of righteous indignation. That is what struck them with the greatest force. You didn't single-handedly destroy their carefully constructed image of respectability. The unrelenting force of truth simply dismantled it for you. Number 9. They desperately tried to trigger a volatile emotional reaction from you, but you strategically triggered their own profound self-revelation instead. They engaged in every conceivable tactic to make you emotionally crack and lose control. They repeatedly poked at your old unhealed wounds, brought up sensitive and triggering topics, resorted to subtle but insidious forms of passive aggression, and even attempted to subtly humiliate you in front of others. Their ultimate goal was to provoke you into losing your composure. That was the central objective of their manipulative scheme, not to directly inflict harm upon you, but to strategically provoke you into an uncontrolled reaction that they could then cynically weaponize against you. They desperately wanted you to lose control so they could triumphantly point their fingers and proclaim, "See, that's the real them. That's the unstable person we've been warning you about all along." They desperately needed a dramatic scene. They were actively seeking to incite chaos and turmoil. They needed you to ultimately become the villain in the carefully fabricated story they were already writing about you behind your back. But you resolutely refused to give them what they so desperately craved. You acutely felt the immense pressure. You clearly saw the carefully orchestrated setup. But instead of impulsively reacting, you resolutely held your ground. You remained centered and grounded in your unwavering truth. You strategically allowed your deliberate silence and unyielding stillness to speak far more powerfully than any emotionally charged outburst ever could. And that is precisely what ultimately broke them, because they were entirely unprepared for your tranquil inner peace. They arrogantly believed they possessed intimate knowledge of your most sensitive triggers. They failed to realize that your transformative healing had effectively unplugged you from their manipulative control. What they utterly failed to comprehend was that your steadfast self-control was not an act of unhealthy emotional suppression. It was a deliberate and carefully considered strategic maneuver. You weren't passively holding back because you were inherently scared or intimidated. You were purposefully withholding a reaction because you possessed a complete understanding of precisely what they were attempting to accomplish, and you resolutely refused to provide them with a convenient shortcut to constructing a false and misleading narrative. And when you maintained your unwavering composure, when you strategically responded with grace and measured kindness instead of succumbing to blind rage, their own deplorable behavior began to appear increasingly suspicious and transparent to everyone around them. That is when everything dramatically turned in your favor. Your unwavering inner peace became like a mirror relentlessly reflecting their own internal turmoil. And suddenly all the subtle but insidious tactics they had been employing began to appear glaringly obvious and repugnant to all those who were observing them. The more steadfastly you remained composed, the more visibly they began to unravel. Their tone became increasingly sharp and acrimonious. Their carefully constructed stories began to directly contradict one another. Their carefully crafted masks began to subtly slip, revealing their true and malevolent intentions. And what was initially intended to be your public exposure ultimately transformed into their own profound self-revelation. Now people are finally seeing them for who they truly are, not because you actively exposed them with your words, but because you strategically allowed them to expose themselves through their own self-destructive actions. Your unwavering restraint forced their inherent desperation into the glaring light of public scrutiny. You didn't merely win the moment, you strategically revealed the truth without resorting to yelling, without leveling any accusatory statements, simply by resolutely refusing to be manipulated into playing their demeaning game. And that is precisely what they hate the most. You didn't play by their carefully constructed rules. You deftly flipped the entire game board. And now they are standing directly in the unwelcome spotlight they had so diligently attempted to place on you. Number 10, they meticulously designed the entire setup, but God strategically rewrote the ending mid-scene, completely altering the intended outcome. They arrogantly believed they had meticulously planned the perfect ending to their twisted drama. Every step was carefully mapped out in advance, from the initial act of betrayal to the inevitable fallout from the insidious whispers behind your back to the final devastating blow that was intended to completely break you. It was all painstakingly crafted with the meticulous precision of a scripted drama. They even timed their attacks to strategically strike when you were at your most vulnerable and susceptible to emotional distress. They wanted the climax of their drama to be your ultimate and complete collapse. They were eagerly anticipating your tears, your uncontrolled rage, your profound sense of isolation, and your all-encompassing emotional meltdown. That was the coveted payoff they had been waiting for with bated breath. But something truly extraordinary and unexpected happened that they hadn't factored into their carefully laid plans. So what's the takeaway from all of this? Essentially, remember that the traps set by those who underestimate you, those who mistake your kindness for weakness, ultimately become springboards for your growth and platforms for revealing their own darkness. You, the anointed one, are equipped with a discernment that sees beyond the surface, a strength forged in silence, and a divine guidance that rewrites the script when it's needed most. This journey isn't about avoiding pain. It's about transforming it into power, wisdom, and a deeper connection to your true purpose. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Have you ever experienced a similar situation? What resonated most with you? Share your experiences, ask your questions, or just chime in with your insights in the comments below. Let's create a supportive space where we can all learn and grow together. And if you found this helpful or inspiring, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future deep dives into spiritual growth, overcoming adversity, and living a life aligned with your highest calling. Let's keep the conversation going, tation going, tation going, tation going, tation going, tation going.